Imagine this: the Pentagon's familiar Department of Defense seal being unscrewed and swapped for one that reads Department of War. Reporters are snapping photos, military officials look uneasy, and Donald Trump is smiling as he signs the executive order that makes it possible. The question practically leaps off the screen: why is Trump so enamored with the word war? And what does this symbolic shift reveal, not only about his psychology, but also about America's future posture on the world stage? On September 5th, 2025, President Trump signed an executive order permitting the US Department of Defense to be publicly rebranded as the Department of War. The order allows this label to be used in communications, signage, websites, and ceremonial settings. It even authorizes Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth to be called Secretary of War in non-statutory contexts. But here's the key detail: legally, the name remains Department of Defense. That's because the official title is locked in place by the 1949 National Security Act amendments. Changing it would require congressional approval. Trump's executive order therefore operates in the symbolic space. It's about presentation, not law. Still, symbolism is never just symbolism. The Pentagon has already begun implementing changes, updated seals, revised social media handles, and the gradual rollout of new branding across bases worldwide. Pentagon officials have grumbled about what Politico described as a million small headaches, from redesigning paperwork to re-engraving plaques in dozens of countries. The financial burden could reach tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars. To understand Trump's move, we need to rewind history. From 1789 until 1947, the United States operated under the War Department. It oversaw the Army military procurement and the prosecution of conflicts. But after World War II, America's strategic reality changed. The creation of the Department of Defense in 1949 reflected a new philosophy. In the nuclear age, survival depended less on waging war than on deterring it. The new name carried a conscious message. The United States was a stabilizing force, not a conquering empire. Defense projected restraint and responsibility in a world newly divided by the Cold War. The rebranding was more than cosmetic. It aligned with America's role as global policeman rather than global aggressor. Fast forward 76 years, and Trump is deliberately reversing that symbolic pivot. So why does Trump prefer war over defense? He hasn't been subtle. In his Oval Office remarks, Trump said, "Defense is weak, it's woke. War is strong. We won World War I, we won World War II. Then we decided to go soft and change the name. I don't like that." This choice of words is classic Trump, blunt, populist, rooted in the idea that strength is measured in aggression. For him, war signals victory and dominance. Defense, by contrast, sounds passive, even timid. Critics argue this framing is simplistic and dangerous, but Trump's supporters see it as a refreshing rejection of political correctness, a return to a warrior ethos that emphasizes decisiveness over diplomacy. This is where the psychology becomes fascinating. Trump isn't only rebranding a department, he's rebranding America's identity. Words matter. Political scientists and communication scholars have long studied how framing, the way an issue is labeled, changes public perception. For example, research in International Studies Quarterly shows that when conflicts are described in terms of defense or security, citizens tend to see them as reluctant necessities. But when words like war or strike are used, support for aggressive policies rises. Trump instinctively understands this. His career, after all, is built on branding. From Make America Great Again to The Apprentice, he knows how a single word can define a narrative. By reviving the Department of War, he taps into a primal, emotional response. The message is simple: America is strong, America fights, America wins. Of course, this doesn't mean America is literally more war-ready because of the new title, but it does change the way both domestic and international audiences perceive US intentions. Language can embolden allies, but it can also antagonize rivals. Some analysts interpret this move through the prism of the madman theory. Originally associated with President Nixon, the idea was that by projecting unpredictability and even recklessness, a leader could deter adversaries from taking risks. Trump has often been compared to this strategy. His fire and fury rhetoric toward North Korea in 2017, his threats against Iran, and now his Department of War branding all fit a similar pattern: project strength through unpredictability. None of this is free. Early estimates suggest the rebrand could cost hundreds of millions of dollars when fully implemented. In an era where the Pentagon already struggles with budget overruns, critics see this as another Trump vanity project, symbolism paid for with taxpayer dollars. This is where Trump's critics sharpen their knives. They argue the money could fund veteran care, readiness training, or modernization projects. Instead, it's being sunk into what one analyst called cosmetic militarism. To be fair, rebranding is not unprecedented. Governments frequently rename departments to signal shifts in focus. But the scale of the Pentagon makes this particular rebrand uniquely expensive. Finally, the international implications. To allies in Europe and Asia, the phrase Department of War sends a blunt message. The United States is done with polite euphemisms. It is openly embracing militarism. For adversaries, however, the move provides propaganda fodder. Russia and China can now argue that America has dropped the pretense of being a defensive power. Expect state media in Moscow and Beijing to seize on the rebrand as proof of American aggression. Diplomatically, this risks complicating US efforts to rally coalitions. Imagine persuading European publics to support American initiatives while flying the banner of a War Department. It could reinforce fears that Washington prefers confrontation over compromise. This is where critics warn that Trump's messaging may undermine the very deterrence he claims to strengthen. Deterrence works when allies and adversaries alike see you as strong and rational. The danger of the Department of War is that it might tip the balance towards strong but reckless. Trump's executive order was dramatic, but it cannot on its own legally rename the Pentagon. That authority lies with Congress, since the Department of Defense is written into the 1949 amendments to the National Security Act. Almost immediately after the order, Republican lawmakers introduced bills to formally change the name. Supporters argued this was about restoring historical clarity and reinforcing American resolve. But Democrats and even some moderate Republicans pushed back. Their concerns centered on diplomatic fallout, costs, and constitutional process. In hearings, skeptics raised questions like, why spend hundreds of millions on a name change when troops need housing upgrades and veterans need health care? Others questioned whether branding America as a nation perpetually at war might hurt long-term alliances. This is where a pattern emerges. Trump excels at headline-grabbing moves, but Congress holds the checkbook. Whether or not the Department of War ever becomes the legal name will depend on lawmakers willing to defend or block this symbolism with real dollars. For soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, the change is more symbolic than operational. Daily missions, chain of command, and budgets remain unchanged, but symbolism matters in military culture. Secretary Pete Hegseth, a Trump ally and decorated veteran, has framed the rebrand as an embrace of the warrior ethos. He argues it strengthens morale and reminds service members that their ultimate purpose is to fight and win wars, not simply defend. Some troops may welcome that message. After all, the military is not a humanitarian organization. It exists to project force when necessary. Yet others might view it as political theater that reduces their complex roles to a single word, war. In practice, the US military does far more than fight wars: disaster relief, training allies, cyber defense, peacekeeping. Critics worry that narrowing the rhetorical frame could undervalue these missions or discourage new recruits who are attracted to service beyond combat. This is one area where Trump's instinct for branding collides with the diverse reality of military life. Beyond policy, the rebrand reveals much about Trump himself. He has always been a marketer at heart. From skyscrapers branded with his name to political slogans like MAGA, he sees power in words and imagery. To him, defense sounds bureaucratic, soft, and his favorite insult, woke. War, on the other hand, is sharp, dramatic, commanding. This is consistent with Trump's broader political style. He thrives on conflict, verbal, political, and now symbolic. By rebranding the Pentagon, he positions himself once again as the man who rejects convention, who says out loud what others won't, who refuses to apologize for American strength. There is a psychological dimension too. Trump has long seen life as a battlefield of winners and losers. Negotiations, elections, even press conferences are contests where one side must dominate. The Department of War fits neatly into that worldview. The critique here is not that Trump is wrong to value strength, few would argue against a strong military, but that his obsession with branding over substance risks confusing perception with reality. America's power is not measured by what its departments are called, but by how wisely it uses its might. It's worth stressing, Trump's move is not entirely without logic. Military forces do exist, ultimately, to wage war. Honesty in labelling may be refreshing to some. There is also a case to be made that euphemisms like defence can obscure the harsher realities of state power, but the criticism lies in execution and emphasis. By focusing on the name rather than the substance, on optics rather than strategy, Trump risks alienating allies, wasting money, and reducing America's military identity to a single aggressive word. In short, the problem is not that Trump wants strength. The problem is that he equates strength with showmanship, when true power often lies in restraint and strategy. As the dust settles, the question remains, is the Department of War just another Trumpian publicity stunt, or the first step toward a deeper reorientation of American military culture? Right now, it looks mostly cosmetic. The laws remain unchanged, the doctrines unaltered, but words have a way of shaping futures. If war becomes the lens through which America sees its role, then strategy itself may eventually shift. The stakes are high. In an era of rising great power competition, global instability, and new domains of conflict, cyber, space, AI, the United States must project strength without tipping into recklessness. Trump's symbolic rebrand walks a thin line between projecting resolve and stoking fear. Whether history will judge it as a bold, clarifying moment or a costly, hollow stunt remains to be seen.